By the third day, Jake's alien classmates were not just surviving, they were learning. Professor Kovacs watched in amazement as the human student taught advanced survival concepts using nothing but simple tools and ancient knowledge. Jake had turned their crash site into a functioning desert survival camp. He showed them how to track the movement of the two suns to predict the hottest and coolest times of day. He taught them to read the wind patterns to know when sandstorms might come. On my planet, we have people called weather predictors, said Nixara, a student from the Stormworld Tempest. They use giant computers to tell us about weather days in advance. Jake pointed to a small cloud formation in the distance. See how those clouds are moving, and the way the wind changed direction an hour ago? There's going to be a dust storm in about 3 hours. We can tell without any computers. How can you be sure? Professor Kovacs asked. Because my people have been reading weather signs for thousands of years, Jake replied. When your life depends on it, you learn to pay attention to everything. Sure enough, 3 hours later, a dust storm hit their area. But Jake had prepared everyone. They covered their faces with damp cloth, sealed their water containers, and waited it out in their improved shelter. The storm passed in an hour, and they were all safe. The alien students began asking Jake questions about human history and abilities. They were shocked by what they learned. Wait, said Veltar. You're telling me humans live in places like this all the time? Not just places. Like this, Jake said. We live in the Sahara Desert, which is even hotter. We live in Death Valley, which can reach 134 degrees. We live in the Atacama Desert, where it doesn't rain for years at a time. The aliens stared at him in disbelief. Without climate suits? Asked Zethara from her cool hole. Without any special equipment most of the time, Jake confirmed. Just clothes, water, and knowledge. There are people called the Tuareg who travel across the Sahara Desert on camels. They've been doing it for centuries. Professor Kovacs was writing furiously in the sand, trying to record everything. This is impossible. No species should be able to adapt to such extreme conditions without technology. But that's exactly what humans did, Jake said. We didn't just adapt to one environment. We spread all over our planet. Hot deserts, frozen Arctic, high mountains where the air is thin, thick jungles everywhere. Jake began explaining human biology to his fascinated audience. He told them about sweating and how humans were one of the few species that could cool themselves this way efficiently. Most animals pant to cool down, like dogs, Jake explained. But humans can sweat from all over their bodies. We can keep cool while we keep working. He demonstrated by doing jumping jacks in the desert heat. While the aliens watched in horror, thinking he would overheat, Jake just sweated and stayed comfortable. Your people evolved to hunt in the heat, Professor Kovacs realized. You could chase prey for hours without stopping. Exactly. We call it persistence hunting. A human can run down a deer or antelope just by following it until it gets too tired to run anymore. We might not be the fastest, but we never give up. The alien students were beginning to understand something important. While their species had developed technology to control their environments, humans had developed themselves to survive in any environment. What about cold places? Asked Quindal. Jake told them about Inuit people living in the Arctic, Tibetan, people living on high mountains, and Russian people surviving in Siberia, where the temperature could drop to minus 60 degrees. We build fires, make warm clothes, and build shelters, Jake said. But mostly we just tough it out. Human bodies are good at dealing with cold, too. This explains so much, said Professor Kovacs. When humans first made contact with the galaxy, everyone wondered how you had developed space travel so quickly. Most species need thousands of years to develop the technology to leave their home planets. Humans did it in less than 100 years after discovering electricity. Because we were already tough, Jake said. We didn't need to make our spaceships perfect. We could survive in them even if things went wrong. Other species needed perfect life support. Humans just needed air and water. The professor nodded. And when humans started colonizing other planets, they didn't terraform them first like everyone else does. They just landed and started living there. Mars, Europa, Titan, all kinds of places, Jake agreed. If humans can live in the Sahara Desert and the Arctic, we can live almost anywhere. As the day went on, Jake continued teaching survival skills, but now the aliens understood that they weren't learning primitive techniques. They were learning advanced biological and cultural adaptations that had made humans one of the toughest species in the galaxy. "Your wet rag cooling system," said Veltar, breathing through his damp cloth. "It's not just a simple trick, is it?" "It's evaporative cooling," Jake explained. "Same principle that industrial cooling systems use, just powered by the sun instead of electricity. Humans figured this out thousands of years ago." Professor Kovacs looked up from his sand notes. "And these shade structures you built?" "Passive. Solar architecture. Humans have been designing buildings this way for centuries. We just scale it down for portable use." Everything Jake had done had scientific principles behind it, but he had learned it as traditional knowledge passed down from his grandfather. The alien students realized that human primitive culture was actually advanced science that didn't need machines to work. "No wonder humans have such a reputation as explorers and survivors," said Nixara. "Other species think you're crazy for going to dangerous places. But dangerous is normal for you." Jake smiled. "Every human child learns some survival skills. We camp, we hike, we learn to read weather and find water. What seems impossible to you is just a fun weekend activity for us." As the fourth night fell, the alien students looked at their human classmate with complete respect. They had started the week thinking humans were primitive newcomers to galactic civilization. Now they understood that humans were survival specialists whose abilities seemed almost magical to species that depended on technology. "Jake," said Professor Kovacs as they settled in for the night, "when we get back, I'm going to recommend that survival training be changed across the galaxy. Every student should learn human techniques." Jake looked up at the stars, thinking about his grandfather and all the humans who had survived in hard places throughout history. "That sounds like a good idea, Professor. Everyone should know how to survive when the machines break down." On the fifth day, Jake woke up early and climbed to the top of a nearby rock formation. He wanted to watch for the rescue ships that should be coming. The desert sunrise was beautiful, with both suns painting the sky in colors that reminded him of Arizona mornings. Down at their camp, his alien classmates were doing much better than anyone had expected. Zethara was comfortable in her cool hole, Veltar was breathing easily through his damp cloth, and Quindal was moving around with his simple support frame. Professor Kovacs had filled several square feet of sand with notes about human survival techniques. He called it the most important research of his career. Around midday, Jake spotted something in the sky. 3 ships were approaching fast, their hulls gleaming in the sunlight. "Rescue ships," Jake called down to the others. The ships landed quickly and rescue teams poured out. They were wearing full environmental suits and carrying medical equipment. The team leader, a tall alien with green skin, looked around in confusion. "Where are the bodies?" the team leader asked Professor Kovacs. "Our long-range sensors showed that all the climate suits failed days ago. We expected to find casualties." "There are no casualties," Professor Kovacs replied calmly. "The human student kept us all alive." The rescue team looked skeptical. They ran medical scans on all the alien students and found them to be in good condition, tired and thirsty but alive and healthy. "This is impossible," said the team's doctor, an insect-like alien with 4 eyes. "These species cannot survive in these conditions without life support. The crystal skin species especially should have died within hours." The doctor examined Zethara in her cooling hole and was amazed. "Her body temperature is perfect. How did you do this without refrigeration equipment?" Jake explained the evaporative cooling system and the underground cooling chamber he had built. The doctor tested the temperature difference and shook his head in disbelief. "This is more efficient than our emergency cooling units," the doctor said, "and it requires no power source." Word about the rescue spread quickly through the galaxy's communication networks. The story of the human student who had saved 11 alien lives using primitive techniques became famous overnight. Back at the Galactic Academic Consortium headquarters, Jake found himself in meeting after meeting with important officials. They wanted to understand exactly what he had done and how it could be used to improve emergency procedures. "Let me see if I understand this correctly," said Chancellor Vexmore, the head of the entire consortium. "You created cooling systems, water purification, Weather prediction, structural engineering, and medical treatment using only materials from broken equipment and knowledge from your ancestors? Yes, sir, Jake replied. My grandfather taught me most of it. The rest was just basic science that humans learn in school. The Chancellor looked through the detailed report that Professor Kovacs had written. Professor Kovacs recommends that we completely revise our emergency survival protocols based on your techniques. I think that's a good idea, Jake said. Technology is great, but it can break. Everyone should know how to survive without it. The story spread beyond academic circles. News programs across the galaxy reported on the miracle of Zerion 7. The image of Jake's simple wet rag became famous as a symbol of human ingenuity. Zathara returned to her ice world and started teaching Jake's cooling techniques to her people. For the first time in their history, members of her species could work in warm environments by using evaporative cooling and shade management. The humans taught us that adaptation doesn't always mean changing the environment, she told her planetary council. Sometimes it means changing how we interact with the environment. Feltar went back to his ocean world and introduced breathing techniques that helped his people work in dry environments. His species had never been able to leave their oceans before, but now they could explore land areas using Jake's methods. Quindal returned to his low-gravity moon, with designs for simple support structures that could help his people work in higher-gravity environments. His species began exploring new worlds that they had thought were impossible to visit. Professor Kovacs wrote a book called Human Survival Techniques, Advanced Biology Disguised as Primitive Knowledge. It became required reading at universities across the galaxy. The human approach to survival is fundamentally different from other species, he wrote. Where we seek to control the environment through technology, humans seek to work with the environment through adaptation. Their techniques are not primitive. They are sophisticated solutions that have been refined over thousands of years of evolution and cultural development. The Galactic Museum of Science created an entire wing dedicated to human survival techniques. The centerpiece was Jake's original wet rag, displayed in a place of honor with a plaque that read, "Simple tools, complex knowledge, unlimited possibilities." Jake received offers to teach at the most prestigious universities in the galaxy, but he decided to finish his geology degree first. He did agree to write a textbook on basic survival techniques that would be translated into hundreds of alien languages. Every species has something to teach the others, Jake said in his introduction to the book. Humans learned to survive in hard places because we had to. Other species learned to build amazing technology because they needed to. When we share knowledge, everyone becomes stronger. The Galactic Academic Consortium established new requirements for all students. Everyone had to learn basic survival skills that would work without technology. They called it the Morrison Protocol, in honor of Jake. Years later, Jake became a famous explorer and survival instructor. He led expeditions to dangerous planets and taught alien students how to survive in environments their species had never experienced before. But he never forgot the lesson from Zerion 7. When the advanced climate suits failed, it wasn't more technology that saved everyone. It was simple human knowledge that had been passed down from grandfather to grandson, from generation to generation. Jake kept a small wet rag in his exploration kit, not because he needed it, but to remind himself that sometimes the most powerful solutions are also the simplest ones. The galaxy learned that day that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their machines or their weapons. It was their ability to survive and adapt anywhere, using nothing but their minds, their bodies, and the wisdom of their ancestors. In a universe full of incredible technology, the most advanced species turned out to be the one that had never forgotten how to live without it. Maya stepped off the transport ship and looked up at the massive crystal towers of the Galactic Institute. The buildings reached high into the purple sky of Kepler Prime, their surfaces glowing with soft blue light. She had dreamed of this moment for years, but now that she was here, fear filled her stomach like ice water. She was one of only 3 humans accepted into the Institute this year. Her acceptance letter sat in her bag next to her PhD certificate from MIT. She had worked for 8 years to earn that degree, studying day and night, writing papers that her professors called brilliant. But here, surrounded by beings from across the galaxy. She wondered if her human education meant anything at all. The other new students walked past her toward the main building. She saw tall, thin creatures with silver skin and 4 arms. Their heads moved in quick, precise motions as they talked in clicking sounds. A group of short, furry beings with huge eyes chattered in high voices while their tails swished behind them. One student looked like a walking tree, its bark-like skin rough and brown, leaves growing from its shoulders. Maya pulled her bag closer and followed the crowd into the main hall. The room was enormous, with a ceiling that seemed to stretch up forever. Floating platforms carried students to different levels, and holographic displays showed information in dozens of languages. Maya's translation device buzzed softly in her ear, converting the alien sounds into English. "Welcome, new students, to the Galactic Institute of Advanced Sciences." The voice came from the center of the room. Maya looked up to see a creature unlike anything she had ever imagined. Professor Zeth Kalar stood 12 feet tall, his body made of what looked like living crystal. Light moved through his transparent form in waves of blue and green. When he spoke, the crystal parts of his body vibrated, creating a sound like wind chimes. "You represent the finest minds from across 17 different worlds," Professor Zeth Kalar continued. His voice echoed through the hall. "Each of you has proven your worth through rigorous testing and academic excellence. Or so your home institutions claim." The professor's crystal form began to glow brighter as he pulled up a holographic display. Student names and photos appeared in the air, floating above the crowd. Maya saw her own picture appear, looking small and plain next to the exotic, alien faces around it. "Let us review our new additions," Professor Zeth Kalar said. His voice carried a tone that Maya's translation device labeled as amusement. "From the Zenthari Republic, we have Kex and Vex, twin prodigies in quantum mathematics. Their minds can process calculations that would require our computers several hours." The 2 silver-skinned beings Maya had noticed earlier stepped forward. They bowed in perfect synchronization, their 4 arms moving in complex patterns. "From the Hegemony, Core Worlds, Quinn 9, a specialist in dimensional engineering. The Hegemony's educational system is known throughout the galaxy for producing the most logical and efficient thinkers." A mechanical-looking being with glowing red eyes nodded once. Its metallic body showed no emotion, but Maya could sense the pride in its stillness. Professor Zeth Kalar continued down the list, praising each student's background and their species' natural abilities. The tree-like being was from a world where individuals could live for thousands of years, accumulating knowledge that spanned centuries. The furry creatures came from a planet where mathematical concepts were as natural as breathing. Then Maya's picture grew larger in the holographic display. "And finally we have Maya Chen, representing the planet Earth." Professor Zeth Kalar's crystal body flickered with what the translation device interpreted as barely contained laughter. "Miss Chen brings us a degree in theoretical physics from something called the Massachusetts Institute of Technology." Whispers and clicking sounds filled the hall. Maya felt her cheeks burn red as hundreds of alien eyes turned toward her. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and never be seen again. "Now, I must be honest with you all," Professor Zeth Kalar continued, his voice growing louder. "Humans are a very young species. Their civilization is barely 10,000 years old. When the Zenthari were building their first quantum computers, humans were still discovering fire. When the hegemony was mapping dimensional pathways, humans thought the Earth was flat." More laughter came from the crowd, though it sounded like musical tones, mechanical buzzing, and sounds Maya had no words for. Earth institutions, while charming in their enthusiasm, simply cannot provide the level of education required for true galactic science, the professor said. His crystal form pulsed with brighter light. "Humans show remarkable persistence, I will give them that. They are like small children who refuse to give up even when faced with impossible tasks. But persistence without proper knowledge is just stubbornness." Maya's hands shook as she gripped her bag tighter. Inside was her thesis on quantum field manipulation, research that had taken her 3 years to complete. Her professors on Earth had called it groundbreaking. But standing here, Listening to this alien professor mock everything she had worked for, she began to doubt herself. "Miss Chen, I hope you understand that you will need to work much harder than your classmates," Professor Zethkeller said, his glowing eyes focusing on her. "Your Earth education, while adequate for your species, represents perhaps 1% of what a first-year student here should know. I suggest you focus on observing and learning from your more advanced peers." The other students turned to look at Maya again. She saw pity in some of their expressions, curiosity in others. The Zenthari twins exchanged rapid clicking sounds that her translator could not interpret. Quinn9's red eyes studied her like she was an interesting but ultimately useless machine. "Classes begin tomorrow," Professor Zethkelar announced. "You will be divided into research groups and given your first major assignment. I expect great things from most of you." As the crowd began to disperse, Maya stood frozen in place. She had traveled across the galaxy to prove that humans belonged among the stars. Instead, she felt smaller than ever before. But deep in her chest, beneath the hurt and embarrassment, something else began to grow. It was the same feeling that had driven her through 8 years of difficult study, the same force that had made her apply to this impossible school in the first place. Professor Zethkelar might think humans were primitive, but Maya knew something he did not. Humans had a gift for proving others wrong. They had climbed mountains because they were told they could not. They had built machines to fly because everyone said it was impossible. They had reached for the stars when the whole universe seemed empty and cold. Maya walked toward her dormitory, her spine straight and her chin up. Tomorrow, classes would begin. Tomorrow, she would start showing this galaxy what humans could do. 3 weeks had passed since the humiliating orientation, and Maya had thrown herself into her studies with desperate energy. She attended every lecture, read every assignment twice, and stayed up late into the night trying to understand concepts. That seemed to come naturally to her alien classmates. The other students had been polite but distant. During group discussions, they would explain things to her slowly, as if she were a child learning to count. When she asked questions, they would exchange glances before answering with patience that felt more insulting than kindness. Maya sat in the front row of Professor Zethkelar's advanced theoretical physics class, her tablet ready to record every word. The professor's crystal body glowed brighter than usual as he prepared to speak, and Maya could sense excitement in the room. "Today, I will present you with your major research project," Professor Zethkelar announced. The holographic display activated, showing a complex diagram that hurt Maya's eyes to look at. "You will attempt to solve the quantum consciousness paradox." Gasps and excited chittering filled the classroom. Maya's translation device worked overtime, picking up fragments of conversation in a dozen languages. She heard words like impossible and legendary and career-making. For those unfamiliar with this problem, Professor Zethkelar continued, though his glowing eyes seemed to focus on Maya. "The quantum consciousness paradox has puzzled the greatest minds in the galaxy for over 800 years. It concerns the fundamental question of how consciousness can exist in a quantum state while maintaining coherent thought patterns across multiple dimensions." The professor gestured, and the holographic display changed to show brain-like structures that seemed to exist in several places at once. Every thinking being in the galaxy experiences consciousness as a singular, unified phenomenon. Yet quantum mechanics tells us that consciousness should exist in multiple states simultaneously, creating millions of different thought patterns at every moment. Maya scribbled notes as fast as she could, trying to keep up with concepts that made her head spin. She had studied quantum mechanics on Earth, but this was far beyond anything human scientists had discovered. "The paradox is this," Professor Zethkelar said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled the entire room. "If consciousness follows quantum rules, then every time you think a thought, you should be thinking all possible variations of that thought at the same time. Your mind should be chaos, not the orderly experience you know. Yet here you all sit, thinking single, coherent thoughts." Kex raised one of his forearms. "Professor, how do we know that consciousness doesn't actually exist in quantum superposition, but we simply perceive it as singular?" "An excellent question. Professor Zethkalar replied, his crystal form pulsing with approval. That hypothesis has been tested extensively. The results show that consciousness definitely operates as a unified phenomenon, not as multiple quantum states, which makes its existence theoretically impossible. Vex clicked rapidly to his twin, then asked, "Has anyone come close to solving this paradox?" "Many have tried," the professor said. "The ancients worked on it for 3 centuries before their civilization fell. The great minds of Proxima spent 200 years developing mathematical models that ultimately proved incorrect. Even the combined intelligence of the collective failed to find an answer." Maya raised her hand tentatively. Professor Zethkalar's expression showed what her translator labeled as mild surprise. "Yes, Miss Chen?" "What approaches have been tried?" Maya asked. "I mean, what methods did these previous researchers use?" "Every conceivable scientific approach," Professor Zethkalar replied. "Pure mathematics, quantum field analysis, consciousness mapping, dimensional theory, biological studies, artificial intelligence modeling, and dozens of others. The problem appears to be fundamentally unsolvable." "Then why assign it to us?" Maya asked. The question seemed to amuse the professor. His crystal body flickered with what Maya had learned was alien laughter. "Because young minds sometimes see things that experienced ones cannot. And because failing to solve an impossible problem can teach you more about your limitations than succeeding at an easy one." Professor Zethkalar activated a new holographic display showing student assignments. "Each of you will be given a specific research approach based on your species' natural cognitive strengths." Maya watched as names appeared next to different research areas. Kex and Vex were assigned to mathematical modeling, their species' specialty. Quinn9 received technological implementation, perfect for a hegemony engineer. Other students got assignments that matched their unique abilities. Then Maya's name appeared at the bottom of the list. "Miss Chen, you will be responsible for observational documentation," Professor Zethkalar announced. "Your role will be to record and organize the research conducted by your teammates. This will give you valuable exposure to advanced scientific methods without requiring you to contribute original ideas beyond your current capabilities." Maya stared at the assignment in shock. She was being asked to be a secretary, not a scientist. Around her, the other students received research roles that would challenge their abilities and advance their careers. She got the job of taking notes. "Professor," Maya said, her voice louder than she intended, "I would like to request a different assignment. I have ideas about the paradox that I would like to explore." The classroom fell silent. Professor Zethkalar's crystal form stopped glowing for a moment, then blazed brighter than before. "Miss Chen, I appreciate your enthusiasm," he said, his voice carrying what Maya recognized as condescending patience. "But this project requires a level of theoretical understanding that takes decades to develop. Your Earth education, while sufficient for your species, simply has not prepared you for this level of work." "But I could try," Maya insisted. "Even if I fail, wouldn't the attempt teach me something valuable? Isn't that what you just said about impossible problems?" More silence filled the room. Maya could feel every alien eye watching her, waiting to see how the professor would respond to her challenge. "Very well," Professor Zethkalar said finally. "You may pursue your own research approach in addition to your documentation duties. When you discover that your ideas lead nowhere, perhaps you will better understand why proper preparation is necessary for advanced science." After class, Maya walked back to her dormitory in a daze. She had gotten what she asked for, but it felt like a trap. The professor expected her to fail, and now she would fail publicly, in front of everyone. Back in her small room, Maya sat at her desk and stared at her notes about the quantum consciousness paradox. 800 years of genius-level minds had failed to solve it. What could one human with a primitive Earth education possibly contribute? But as she read through the problem again, something began to bother her. All the previous approaches seemed to assume that the paradox needed to be eliminated, that consciousness and quantum mechanics had to be forced into agreement somehow. What if that assumption was wrong? Maya opened her tablet and began to type. She had 3 months to either solve the unsolvable or prove that humans really did not belong among the stars. Either way, she was not going to give up without trying everything she could think of. Outside her window, the alien stars of Kepler Prime began to appear in the darkening sky. They looked cold and distant, like the expressions of her classmates. But Maya had spent her whole life looking up at stars that seemed impossible to reach, and humans had reached them anyway. She typed faster, ideas beginning to flow like water from a broken dam. Maybe human thinking really was different from alien logic. Maybe that difference was not a weakness but a strength. Maybe the reason no one had solved the paradox was because they had all been thinking about it in the same way. Maya worked through the night, fueled by coffee she had brought from Earth and a stubbornness that Professor Zethkalar had dismissed as a primitive human trait. But stubbornness had built human civilization, and it might just be what the galaxy needed to solve, its oldest mystery. Maya had been working for 6 weeks straight, and her research looked nothing like what her classmates were doing. While Kex and Vex filled holographic displays with elegant equations, and Quinn 9 built complex quantum measurement devices, Maya surrounded herself with what looked like chaos. Her dormitory room had become a maze of papers, tablets, and screens showing everything from human brain scans to jazz music waveforms. She had printed out research from Earth on topics that seemed completely unrelated to quantum consciousness: evolutionary psychology, chaos theory, musical harmony, weather patterns, and even studies of how humans solved jigsaw puzzles. "This is madness," she whispered to herself as she stared at a diagram comparing neural activity during creative thinking to the structure of a Bach fugue. But the madness felt right in a way that pure logic never had. Every few days, Professor Zethkalar would visit her research team to check on their progress. He would spend an hour reviewing Kex and Vex's mathematical models, nodding with approval as their equations grew more sophisticated. He would examine Quinn 9's technological innovations with obvious fascination. Then he would glance at Maya's chaotic workspace and shake his crystal head in what her translator identified as disappointment, mixed with pity. "Miss Chen," he said during his latest visit, "I see you are exploring various topics. Perhaps you should focus more on the core problem instead of these random tangents." Maya looked up from a paper about how human children learn language. "Professor, I don't think they're random. I think they're all connected." "Connected how?" Professor Zethkalar asked, his crystal form flickering with what Maya had learned was barely controlled irritation. "Well," Maya said, pulling up several displays at once, "look at this study of how humans make creative breakthroughs. We don't solve problems by following logical steps. We let our minds wander, make unexpected connections, and suddenly see patterns that weren't visible before." "That sounds like inefficient thinking," Quinn 9 observed, his mechanical voice flat and precise. "It is inefficient," Maya agreed. "But it's also effective for certain types of problems, the kind where logic alone isn't enough." Kex clicked rapidly to his twin, then asked, "Are you suggesting that the quantum consciousness paradox requires illogical thinking?" "Not illogical," Maya said, trying to find the right words. "Nonlinear. Every species that has tried to solve this paradox has approached it the same way. Identify the problem, break it down into parts, analyze each part logically, then build a solution. But what if the paradox exists precisely because consciousness doesn't work that way?" Professor Zethkalar's crystal body went completely still. A sign Maya had learned meant he was either very interested or very angry. "Explain." Maya stood up and activated her main display. Instead of the clean equations and diagrams her classmates used, her screen showed what looked like a tangled web of connections between hundreds of different concepts. "Look at how human consciousness actually works," she said, pointing to brain. "Scan images. When we think about one thing, dozens of other thoughts fire at the same time. Memory, emotion, pattern recognition, creative association, they all happen together, not in sequence. That sounds chaotic and inefficient, Vexy." "Observed, it is chaotic," Maya said. "But that chaos might be the key. What if consciousness doesn't exist despite quantum uncertainty but because of it? The room went quiet. Maya could hear her own heartbeat as she continued. Every other species approaches problems by trying to eliminate variables, reduce complexity, find clean solutions, but humans evolved to thrive in messy, uncertain environments. We're good at dealing with paradoxes because our whole existence is paradoxical. She pulled up another display showing human behavior studies. We're logical enough to build spaceships, but emotional enough to cry at sunsets. We're individual enough to compete fiercely, but social enough to sacrifice ourselves for strangers. We hold contradictory beliefs and somehow function anyway. This is fascinating speculation, Professor Zethkalar said, his voice carefully neutral. But how does it relate to quantum consciousness? Maya took a deep breath. This was the part she had been afraid to say out loud, the idea that seemed too crazy even for her chaotic research methods. What if consciousness doesn't collapse quantum possibilities into a single thought? What if it surfs them? She activated a new display showing wave patterns. Think about how a surfer rides a wave. They don't control the water. They work with its natural motion, adjusting constantly to stay balanced on something that's always changing. You're suggesting that consciousness rides quantum probability waves? Quinn9 asked, his red eyes flickering with what might have been interest. More than that, Maya said, her excitement growing as the pieces fell into place. I think consciousness creates a kind of resonance with quantum uncertainty. Instead of collapsing possibilities into single thoughts, it maintains a dynamic balance between multiple potential thoughts, like a juggler keeping several balls in the air. Kex and Vex exchanged rapid clicks. The mathematics of such a system would be incredibly complex, Kex said. Too complex for traditional analysis, Vex added. It would require new types of equations that could handle infinite variables in constant flux. Maya nodded eagerly. Exactly. That's why no one has solved the paradox. They keep trying to find a stable solution to an inherently unstable system. But what if instability is the solution? Professor Zethkalar's crystal form began to pulse, with rapid patterns of light. This is highly speculative theory, Miss Chen. Do you have any evidence to support these claims? Maya's excitement deflated slightly. Not yet, but I have ideas about how to test it. I've been working on a framework I call quantum cognitive resonance. Instead of trying to measure consciousness as a fixed thing, it would map the dynamic interactions between conscious awareness and quantum probability fields. She pulled up her most complex diagram, showing wave patterns that seemed to dance and shift even as they displayed on the screen. It's based on chaos theory, but applied to quantum mechanics. The idea is that consciousness doesn't eliminate chaos. It creates order within chaos, like a jazz musician improvising a perfect solo from seemingly random notes. The room fell silent again. Maya watched her classmates' faces, trying to read their alien expressions. Were they impressed, confused, or just being polite? Finally, Professor Zethkalar spoke. Miss Chen, your approach is unprecedented. I will admit that your framework addresses some aspects of the paradox that traditional methods have not considered. Maya felt a flutter of hope. However, the professor continued, theory without proof is merely speculation. You have 7 weeks remaining to develop your ideas into something more substantial. I suggest you focus less on creative connections and more on rigorous testing. After the professor and her teammates left, Maya sat alone in her chaotic workspace. 7 weeks to prove that human thinking could solve a problem that had stumped the galaxy's greatest minds for 8 centuries. 7 weeks to show that chaos and intuition and messy human creativity had value in a universe that prized logic and efficiency. She looked at her reflection in one of her dark screens. The young woman staring back looked tired and overwhelmed, surrounded by the scattered pieces of an impossible puzzle, but her eyes held something that hadn't been there when she first arrived at the Institute. Confidence. Maya had spent 6 weeks learning to think like herself instead of trying to think like an alien. She had stopped apologizing for her human approach and started celebrating it. Now she just needed to prove that her wild theories could work in the real world. She opened a new file on her tablet and began typing. Quantum Cognitive Resonance, a framework for dynamic consciousness modeling. It was time to turn her chaotic web of connections into something the galaxy would have to take seriously. Outside her window, the alien stars of Kepler Prime blazed in patterns that looked almost like music. Maya smiled and got back to work. 5 hours later, both ships emerged safely from the dangerous asteroid field. The manual navigation had worked perfectly. Every hour, the alien cadets had taken new star readings, plotted their position, and made small course corrections. Their confidence had grown with each successful position fix. Jake watched as Velnara took their final star reading. She handled the sextant like an expert now, her movements smooth and precise. "Final position shows we are clear of all asteroids," she reported with obvious pride. Commint was marking their position on the paper chart. "We followed the planned route exactly. The manual navigation was completely accurate." As soon as they cleared the interference field, the Zephyrian ship's advanced systems came back online. Holographic displays flickered to life, and the quantum computers began running their diagnostic programs. But the alien cadets were no longer focused on their technology. "Commander Morrison," Zixthan said formally, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong to dismiss human navigation methods as primitive." Jake smiled. "No apology needed. Your technology is impressive when it works. But your methods work when our technology fails," Velnara added. "That makes them more valuable, not less." The 3 alien cadets gathered around the paper charts one more time. They had spent hours learning to read these simple maps, and now they understood their true worth. "These charts saved our lives," Commint said quietly. "Your grandfather's careful observations and recordings gave us a way out when our computers could not help us." Jake began packing up the navigation instruments. He would be happy to know his work helped someone. "Commander," Zixthan said, "I have a request. Would it be possible to obtain copies of these star charts?" "Of course," Jake replied. "But may I ask why?" Zixthan looked at his fellow cadets before answering. "We want to take them back to our academy. Our instructors need to see what we learned here today." Velnara nodded enthusiastically. "We want to learn more about manual navigation. Our entire civilization has forgotten these skills." "It's not just about navigation," Commint added. "It's about understanding the principles behind the technology we use every day." Jake was impressed by their change in attitude. A few hours ago, these proud aliens had considered humans to be a primitive species. Now they wanted to learn from human knowledge and experience. "I'll make copies for you," Jake promised. "And I'll include some basic navigation instruments too." Amy joined the conversation. "If you're serious about learning manual navigation, I can recommend some good training materials. Earth Space Academy has excellent courses on celestial navigation." "You would share your training methods with aliens?" Zixthan asked in surprise. "Knowledge should be shared," Jake replied. "That's how everyone gets better." The alien cadets spent another hour practicing with the navigation tools before their rescue ship arrived. A massive Zephyrian cruiser appeared on their sensors, responding to the emergency beacon they had activated days earlier. "That's the ZNS Starweaver," Velnara said, recognizing the approaching vessel. "Admiral Kethron commands the training fleet." Jake watched the sleek alien warship approach. It was 3 times larger than his own vessel, with advanced weapon systems and gleaming armor plating. The technology gap between human and Zephyrian civilization was obvious. "Will you tell your admiral what happened here?" Jake asked. Zixthan straightened his shoulders. "I will tell him exactly what happened, how human navigators used traditional methods to guide us to safety when our advanced systems failed, and how we learned that older methods are not inferior methods," Commint added. The Starweaver contacted both ships. Admiral Kethron appeared on the communication screen, his silver eyes scanning the humans with obvious curiosity. "Cadets, report." "Your status," the Admiral commanded. Zixthan stepped forward. "Sir, our quantum navigation systems failed completely in the interference field. We were rescued by Commander Morrison and his crew using manual celestial navigation techniques." Admiral Kethron looked skeptical. "Manual navigation? That is an obsolete technology." With respect, sir, it is not obsolete, Velnara said boldly. It is fundamental. These humans demonstrated navigation skills that we have completely lost. Jake watched the alien admiral's expression change as the cadets explained what they had learned. The young aliens spoke with passion about star charts, sextants, and position plotting. They described how human navigators maintained traditional skills alongside modern technology. Fascinating, Admiral Catherine said finally. Commander Morrison, my cadets seem quite impressed with your methods. They're good students, Jake replied. They learned very quickly. I want to propose something, Zixton said suddenly. An exchange program between our academy and the Human Space Academy. Our students could learn manual navigation, and human students could study our quantum systems. Admiral Kethran considered this proposal carefully. That would be unprecedented, but after hearing your report, I believe it has merit. Jake was surprised by the suggestion, but he liked the idea. I think Earth Command would be very interested in such an exchange. Amy had finished preparing copies of the star charts and navigation guides. She handed the package to Velnara. These will get you started. The fundamentals are the same whether you're navigating on water, in atmosphere, or in deep space. Kumint examined the instruments Jake had given them. We will practice these techniques during our return journey to the Academy. And we will recommend changes to our curriculum, Zixthan added. Future Zephyrian navigators should understand both quantum computers and stellar navigation. As the alien ships prepared to depart, Admiral Kethran contacted Jake one final time. Commander Morrison, I want to thank you for rescuing our cadets, but more importantly, I want to thank you for teaching them. It was my pleasure, Admiral. Your methods may seem simple to us, but today we learned that simple does not mean inferior. In fact, sometimes simple means reliable. Jake nodded. That's exactly right, sir. The Zephyrian ships activated their faster-than-light drives and disappeared into hyperspace. Jake stood on his bridge watching the empty space where they had been. Think they'll really change their training program? Amy asked. Jake smiled. I think those 3 cadets will make sure of it. They learned something important today about the value of fundamental skills. What's that? Amy asked. That the most advanced navigator is not the one who knows the most complicated technology, Jake replied. It's the one who can adapt to any situation using whatever tools are available. The UES Horizon resumed its patrol route, but Jake knew this encounter would be remembered for a long time. 3 alien cadets had learned that human knowledge was not primitive but practical, and perhaps more importantly, they had learned that wisdom often came from understanding both the new and the old. In the months that followed, the story spread throughout both human and Zephyrian space forces. The incident became a legend about the importance of maintaining fundamental skills in an age of advanced technology, and it led to the first interspecies naval exchange program, where young officers learned that progress did not mean abandoning the past but rather building upon it. The old star charts that Jake's grandfather had drawn by hand became some of the most valuable navigation documents in the galaxy. Not because they were advanced, but because they worked when everything else failed. And sometimes that was exactly what made them perfect.